from the Weizmann Institute, who is going to talk to us about ants. Kayleen is going to be your timekeeper. You have 30 minutes.
Okay. Okay, good morning. So I don't obstruct. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be talking about ants and about what you could do, what they do without a central brain. So let's start with a brief history of important events on our planet, like from the emergence of life to multicellularity. 3 billion years ago. And then neurons and a bit later brains are less than 1 billion years old and up to this event here. And what we notice, of course, is that you had all this time, most of our planet's history, where brains and even neurons were not available to life, but cognition was always, of course, adaptive. Okay, the environment is always surprising, changing. You have to deal quickly with what is happening. Get your food, run away. So you had all this time where life had to deal to produce cognition without a brain. And the question is, okay, so how does it exist at all? Probably does. And how does it work? How does cognition without a brain work? We're so used to defining and thinking about cognition in terms of brains. And how advanced could it be? Okay, perhaps if you don't have a brain and if you don't have all this very intricate hardware, you can do much less. Okay, so what can you do without a brain? And we can look at a few examples, and one of them is to look at animals that evolved before neurons, like the slime mold. And this is a famous experiment where they put a slime mold on the map of Tokyo, where in each train station they put a piece of food, and then the slime mold finds the routes, the most efficient routing between the stations, and it's very close and even better in some senses than the actual train map of Tokyo. And but I don't study slime molds, I study ants. And this is something that evolved about 150 million years ago. Eusociality, it's also considered a major evolutionary transition if we're talking on these events. So this is the last major event or transition in evolution. And eusociality, this means that this is a society where all the members but one gave up on multiplying and dividing. So the only one, that can divide, is the queen. Okay, so all the rest are sterile, and this means that they are completely aligned in their interest. Okay, so this is like one evolutionary unit, and they have to work together. So the queen can reproduce as much as possible, and this evolutionary unit does not have a central brain. Okay, so there are brains for the individual ants, but there is no central brain, no central neuronal substrate. So what can they do together? Okay, so this is kind of how I want to touch on the subject of the conference. And we'll see like 3 examples of how ants display cognition without having a central brain. The first is externalizing representation, so they're not in the brain but outside. The second is leadership and coordination, and these two I will talk only very briefly about. And the last one is emergent and active cognition. So let's start with the first one, external representations. And so the ants, as we said, they do not have a shared neuronal substrate. They cannot have shared, it's difficult for them to have representations on this missing substrate. So one thing they do is they externalize the representations, and they externalize them in ways that often we can simply see by eye, right? So when you go out on lawns, often you will see these kind of ant trails on the lawns. It's just where they apply, this is the ways to the food, and they apply pesticide there, and they actively take out the seeds and cut out any grass that starts to grow. And this actually acts as a memory, right? So the next ant that comes out of the nest, she doesn't have to remember where the food is. If she just follows this collectively made trail, she can reach the food, okay? So this is like an externalized memory, which is, instead of representing space somehow in the brain, and then like on a cognitive map or whatever, and then marking routes in the space, no, they mark directly in the physical space. Okay, and this actually gives you all kinds of things that we talked about. For example, affordances. So here, this is a picture of a piece of food. So this is from a real experiment carried by ants. And these are scent marks laid by individual ants. And we can see that the scent marks tell the food where to go and where not to go. Sometimes it falls off, but then they catch it again. So these scent marks give affordances to the future actions of the ants. Okay, where can we go? Where can't we go? And this happens really in real time as they are working. Or here's another thing we observed. So these ants are collectively transporting this large insect, and you can see some of the ants are carrying pebbles away from the path. So this makes it easier for them to carry the food. And actually, they take these little pebbles not only from under the insect, but also in front of it, where it didn't reach yet. Okay, so this is a sort of anticipation. And how do they know where the food is going to reach in the future? It's exactly because these scent marks have been laid there a few seconds ago by other ants that say, okay, this is a route to go. So they already clear it. Okay, so actually this sort of representation, as we discussed here before, representations allow you to anticipate future actions, and we see this sort of anticipation in the ants. They clear the route ahead of time. Okay, second route towards collective cognition is leadership and coordination. So again, we're going to look at ants that are carrying a large object together. Okay, so like these people are going on the boat together. You need a lot of power to move the boat, but you also need someone to steer it. Okay, so this is kind of the idea. And these are the ants as they carry a bigger load. So you'll see the ants are very coordinated. The ants in the front, in the leading edge, are pulling, and the ants in the trailing edge are lifting. You can really see this angle that it gets. Okay, so since all the ants, so they're just coordinating themselves by the motion of the load. If it's coming towards me, I will lift. If it's going away from me, if it's coming towards me, I will pull. If it's going away from me, I will lift. And this is a very easy way for them to coordinate and to avoid tug of wars. So this is the first thing that the ants do, very simple, and you don't need too much cognition for this. But, so it's a good way of moving large objects and avoiding tug of wars, but you don't have the steering. So how do they steer themselves? And this is this leadership. So as we said, individual ants, the ants evolved from solitary insects 150 million years ago. They did not lose their brains. So solitary insects were already good at surviving in this world. They have brains. They can navigate. So here the ants use this. Okay, so they kind of use the cognition of individuals as a stepping stone towards group cognition. So here we will see these ants are carrying this Cheerio, and instead of going towards home, which is in this direction, they made a mistake. They're all cooperating very nicely, but in the wrong direction. So they're going up, but then this new ant comes. She knows the precise direction, and you can see that the moment she attaches, she can correct the group. Okay, so the group is now following this individual ant, which and enhancing or empowering her to move the Cheerio, which she cannot do alone. Okay, it's too heavy for her to move alone. But then, okay, so this system relies on individual cognition, but can it enhance it? Okay, so on the face of things, it looks okay. You're just adding a series of single ants. You probably cannot do more, but actually this is not the case. So, yeah?
In this situation, how does someone who wants to become a leader communicate with the rest
Yeah, so actually they don't have to communicate. They just follow different rules than the rest of the ants. All the ants that are carrying for some time, they just go with the flow. So if the Cheerio is coming towards them, they pull. If it's going away from them, they lift. The new ant that just came in, and she's very well oriented, she doesn't follow this rule. She doesn't go with the flow. She pulls in the direction that she thinks this is the good direction to go. And the group is poised in such a collective state that they will immediately react, even though they don't know, they immediately react to this ant just because she persists in her pulling direction.
But doesn't she have to be very strong?
No, she doesn't. So because so this relies on the fact that it's a physical fact that near a phase transition, it's very easy to switch a magnet from pointing up to pointing down with a very small magnetic field. So they rely on this physical phenomenon. Actually, they poise themselves, or they don't poise themselves in natural group sizes. They're near the phase transition, and then it's very easy with one ant strength to veer them in a different direction.
So what's going to happen if an ant from a different nest comes and decides to hijack it?
Yeah, from a different nest, usually it doesn't happen. First, they inhabit, these ants are in a huge colony that inhabits all the nests around. But they can, of course, have a conflict between one nest entrance and another nest entrance. And this comes in exactly in this way. And I won't talk about it here, but trust them that they do it very well. So again, we ask, okay, can this sort of group and individual control together, can it enhance what an individual can do? So we gave the ants this kind of a puzzle, and here they have to move this T-shaped puzzle out of the maze, so in this direction. And this is just a geometrical puzzle. It's called the piano movers puzzle in motion planning. And so we can make it, because it's geometric, we can make it in any size. If we make it for a single ant size, the ant cannot solve this puzzle. But if we make the same puzzle much larger, okay, but it's exactly the same puzzle with the same motions, and we give it to a group of ants, they consistently solve it. So again, I won't go exactly to what is happening here, because I want to get to my third example. But you can see that yes, actually, cognition of the individual can be enhanced, and we can actually measure it by giving a puzzle that this solver can solve and this solver cannot solve. And a side note for humans, because here we concentrate a lot on humans, for humans it's actually the opposite. So individuals can solve this puzzle, but when you give them to a group, they do solve it. They are better than ants on average. Some groups are worse than ants. But we are better than ants on average, but the groups have a harder time than individuals. So we're the opposite, actually.
You said that there was one ant which is a leader and has good orientation.
Yeah.
To give to that ant this puzzle on a small scale, would that
No,
particular
it's
ant
not.
solve it?
This ant that has good orientation, it's not because she's special in any way. It's because she was not attached until now, because she came from the outside. So she could look around, she could walk around.
So how do the group of ants solve this problem?
I will go to in the coffee, as we say here, because I want to get to my third example. Yeah, so I just want to run through these, actually. And the third one, which is most excites me now is this emergent and active cognition. And this has to do with a special ant. It's a tropical ant called the weaver ant. These are ants we study are Asian weaver ants. They live from India to northern Australia. And they build their nest from leaves. The nest looks like this. The leaves are still alive, attached to the trees. So it's a very nice home to live in. The leaves are breathing. They give you oxygen. They take away the CO2. So the ants, these arboreal ants, live inside these live green nests. And how do they make them? So to make them, the ants assemble on the leaves, and then they connect their bodies into these kind of bridges, which act as tools, because they actually apply force to the leaves and move the leaves and reshape the leaves or bend them in a way that will give you this sphere, as we saw, which is like a rigid sphere, a closed sphere. And then once they get this shape, if they let go, all the leaves will pop open, of course. So what they do, so they don't have to stand there, is they bring their young larvae, which can produce silk, like the larva of a butterfly can produce silk, and they stitch the leaves together or glue them together with silk, and then you get these structures. You can see the silk holding the leaves together. So this is what the nest looks like, which is this process is already amazing. And what is more amazing to me is that this behavior is highly robust. Okay, so they live in the tropics. There are many, many kinds of trees, many kinds of leaves, size, shape, thickness. But doesn't matter which tree they're on, and doesn't matter how many leaves or they're using now, or the configuration of these leaves. They will take each one and turn it into what they need, which is this closed, spherical, mechanically rigid structure. Okay, so it looks like the ants are displaying a will. Okay, so they have a will which comes from somewhere. Okay, like many biological entities have a will. So their will is to build this shape of a nest of this shape. And satisfying this will is not trivial. Okay, so if I gave you these leaves to each one of you, it's not so trivial. How do you connect them together? How do you bend them together to make a rigid sphere, right? So satisfying this will requires open-ended generative. You generate a solution, problem solving in huge search space, right? You have many leaves, and all of them can bend in many directions, and it's non-abelian, right? If you bend one, it can be out of reach for the others, or you have to do things in a certain order, perhaps. So this looks like cognition, even quite impressive cognition, I think. And so where does this will come from? Maybe again it comes from individuals, leaders like we saw before, but this is what this behavior looks like from the perspective of individual ants. Individual ants are very small compared to the leaf. They cannot move them. They cannot bridge between leaves. They cannot see the large picture. Okay, so this can be huge. It can be this size. The ants are 1 centimeter. The leaves are also opaque. So therefore, they form this large-scale assemblages to be able to do something. And it looks, again, it's not that I can prove it for now, but it looks like the individual intent of an ant, which is to connect to a bridge or pull on another ant, has nothing to do with the collective will, which is a closed, rigid structure in 3D, right? So it looks completely detached. The ants have almost no way of knowing. They don't know if they're on the inside of the forming shape, on the outside, or whatever. So it looks here. So again, this is I'm not 100% sure of it, but I would bet 90% that the ants have no idea what is going on. This is a comparison to the previous one where we had these leaders that knew exactly what's going on. And I would say that as a physicist, weaver ants really defy my intuition. So how can large-scale will and cognition emerge from actions of tiny, ignorant, local actions of tiny, ignorant individuals? Like my physics intuition tells me that each leaf shape that I would give the ants, they would produce another 3D shape. Some of them will be goodness, some of them will be flawed. So this is very intriguing. How do they do it? So to study this, we brought this to the lab. But the nice thing, the ants don't build nests just from real leaves. They can use also artificial leaves that we can just cut out like from transparency type paper. So we can make any leaf we want, and this means we can, again, challenge the ants with puzzles, which we'll see very soon, and try like this to test, okay, how smart are they really? And another nice thing, in the lab, it's very easy to image, not very easy, it's possible, sorry, to image what is happening, because in nature it's very tough, and therefore these ants were hardly studied, even though they're recognized as the most impressive ants, I think, but they were very hardly studied until a few years ago. So we have this camera array of 50 cameras all around the ants, and we can use it to build 3D reconstructions of where all the leaves are each time. So all the cameras shoot at the same time, and then we can turn this into a 3D model and find the ants on it, etc. So we can track everything that is happening. And I'll show you just, so we started by giving the ants very simple puzzles. So like this 4-leaf puzzle. So these are 4 leaf at 90 degrees with each other. And this whole process happens in about 20 to 30 minutes. So it's sped up here. So you can see the ants are building their kind of tools between the leaves. So you have here. And then they bend them up. If we give them also the larva, they will glue them together. And here is a second experiment. Here, the same 4 leaves, but their attachment to the stem is at a bit lower angle. And they are too far for the ants to bridge between them, so the ants fold them all down by these weights until they get close enough, and then they catch them together and fold the nest inside out. Yeah?
They always do that? I mean, do they need to trigger them to?
No, they
This is just what they.
yeah, it's what they do when they get flexible, something which is movable. Yeah. And you can see this transition. So we have the stem angle, the holder angle. If it's high, they will close the nest upwards. If it's a low angle, they will close the nest downwards. And there is some transition. It happens at different places for different leaf thicknesses. So first we tried to understand, okay, can we calculate the transition point? Just to start understanding what is happening here. What are we seeing? Where does this transition come from? Okay, so we're looking at a simple case. And then we had to look at these tools that the ants are making, because this is the way of the ants to interact with the environment. The only way to move the environment is through these tools. So we have this weight tool. So here they make just 2 kinds of tools in this simple environment. The weights, of course, the longer the weight, the more the leaf will bend down. This is very simple. And then you have this zipper tool. So the ants connect 2 leaves together. And when they do, they can connect more and more points, and the leaves zip together. And when you zip 2 leaves together, their angle difference becomes smaller, of course, because they're together. But also their height, either upwards or downwards, or their absolute angle becomes larger or smaller. So when you zip them together, they don't only come together, because actually they cannot move in this direction. The only way they can come closer is by moving out of the plane, up or down. Okay, so this is this kind of zipping action that you can understand by local rules. Chains can connect points that are close enough together between the leaves, and then they pull them together, and then new points become available because they become now close enough. And you get this feedback loop, which is very much like a zipper, which brings the leaves together and also
That's their objective.
brings them. Yeah, maybe that's their objective, to bring leaves.
Between the edges of the leaves.
Yeah, for example, yeah. And I just want to say that this feedback loop between the tool that the ants make and the leaves, which are changing each other, okay, so the configuration of the leaves tell you where the zipper will form, and then the zipper changes the leaves, and then, so you have this feedback loop, and this is exactly a hallmark of an active cognition, okay? Cognition without a brain, cognition that you have to enact. You cannot think what you're going to do. You have to enact it, and you respond to the environment responds to you, and this is how you move around. So this is like a famous theory of cognition without a brain. And we can use it, I won't go into it too much, to understand exactly where the transition happens at around 30 degrees. But we can use this And further, we can understand also why this zipping would lead to functional rigid and sphere-like nest. And to do this, we have to use differential geometry and the fact that leaves are non-stretchable in our experiment as well as in nature. And leaves have convex edges, which is true just not for any leaves, but for the leaves we used here. And we have to assume that the ants zip the leaves all the way up. And if you do this, you can use like really simple reasoning from differential geometry to understand why, and the topology to understand why you get a rigid closed structure. Okay, so I will not go into it, but it kind of happens. Okay, so the mechanics of thin shells and the geometry and the constraints of geometry in a 3D space make the ants do this. Okay, so again, we have these 4-leaf experiments. We have tool-mediated sensory motor loops that gave us this inactive cognition. We use thin shell mechanics and differential geometry, and we get this closed, convex, mechanically stable structure that the ants are making. So we kind of understood what is happening here. I didn't go to all the details. So it does look inactive. I think it's pretty clear that you have this sensory motor feedback loop, but is it cognitive? Okay, so the ants did finally something kind of simple. Okay, so they pulled the leaves together, and because we made the leaves in this kind of shape that we all know falls into a sphere, so they did fall into a sphere. So it's not clear that this is cognitive. Okay, should I call it cognitive? You cannot call something cognitive by one example. So finally what we did is okay, so let's look at this tool and leaf coupled system. So we have many tools coupled to each other through the leaves to many other tools. So the system becomes all-to-all coupled, which is, I call this an embodied machine or a cognitive machine, I can call it. And now we want to understand, okay, let's test the cognitive capacity of this machine with increasingly difficult puzzles. Okay? And the idea is in combinatorial large space, like the one we have here, searching by random walk is not a good way to find a solution. Where we had this T-shaped puzzle, it was that I showed before. This was a relatively low dimensional space, x, y, and theta. You could search it by random walk and finally find a solution, but this is huge dimensional. So it can become harder. And maybe heuristics are an alternative, so let's think in the terms of heuristics. So right now we saw like the zipping heuristic, which proved to be very effective on the simple 4-leaf puzzles. Okay, so when you have a zipper, zipping it works. But what if you have this kind of a shirt? If I try to zip it, nothing helps. So let's act as an adversary and try to design puzzles where the previous heuristics we identified fail. Okay, so one example is, so this is the puzzle we had before. If you zip leaves together that end kind of in a point, then you'll get a nice closed structure, okay, like a tent-like structure. But what if we give them leaves that actually expand? So if they expand, as you go further from the stem, the radius goes higher and higher, or the total circumference goes higher and higher, and then we expect something like a trumpet, which is actually very bad, because this has a large hole, and in the rainforest, a large hole is not so good. So we gave them these kind of expanding leaves, and indeed at the beginning the ants used local zipping like we saw before, and indeed we get this trumpet-shaped, which is very bad. Okay, so you get this trumpet, and then you can think of this eulogy for the whole premise of the talk even. But we waited we were patient, waited a few minutes more, and the ants seem to have switched their strategy, and they closed it which we completely didn't anticipate. They formed a closed structure like this, like a very nice, symmetric, closed, sphere-like, rigid shape. But maybe this was mere luck, and again, this is maybe a question I'm asking you, how to understand if it's mere luck and if we're not designing our puzzles correctly. But to try to avoid mere luck, we'll try to give them as many puzzles as we can and try to challenge them in many ways. So for example, here we have 2 leaves pointing up and 2 leaves with the stems down. So these 2 are supposed to close up and these 2 are supposed to close down, which is bad by the rules we already understood. Here, if they tie the edges together, they're going to have a very large hole in their nest, which is bad. And here, if they tie the edges together, they just don't work well together, right? Because we made this one jagged. So I will run all these movies at once, but they will finish in this order. So you can look at this one first until it finishes, and then this one, then this one. So let's look at this one. So these one do close up, but they go and collect the other 2, and this entire thing closes up. And here, again, they do start by zipping together the edges. And then they have a huge hole here, which is bad. But if we wait a bit longer, hop, they just discard this leaf and they build their nest using 3 leaves only. And here in the chiral nest, they actually find a way to connect edges. So each edge connects to the surface near it. And these jagged edges are left out of the structure. So it gets this chiral. So after a few trials, they close it, open it, close it, open it. They reach this very nice chiral solution each time. Okay, so either they have some very, very strong heuristic that works for any shape we have thought of until today, or maybe they have some purposeful heuristic shifts. And again, how does one distinguish between this? Or this is a question that I ask the theoreticians here. I would love to get help on this. And maybe further questions that communicate with the theme of this week. Okay, so maybe are there representations hiding here? Maybe the ants and the leaves together are formally like a representation, and this is actually cognition with representation. It's just a very different form of mechanical representation that has to do with the state of the ants and the leaves. Is this really advanced cognition, or how should we define advanced cognition? And finally, our brains or representations are requirements for open-ended improvisatory problem solving, as we appear to see here. So, okay, so even before going to world models, even simpler are representations even required. And that's it. Thank you. So I'd like to thank also Michal, Gadi, and Udi that did the final work, and the people in yellow did the work, the parts 1 and 2. So, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
How, you keep saying they don't have representations? How do you know that?
Yeah, so they might, again, so this was a...
In their, like...
Yeah, no, in the individual minds of the ants, I'm not saying that they don't have representation. I'm saying that, again, this is like a huge debate in insect literature, whether insects have a cognitive map or not. So I'm not getting into that. I'm saying that in the last in the last example I get, a representation that an ant might have in its head is so much diminished to what is needed to make a closed sphere, which is much larger than her, that it's irrelevant in many ways, at least. Okay, so I don't want to say anything too strong, but it's irrelevant in many ways. Yes. Yes. Okay.
I want to go to the beginning. I don't understand why you call it brainless cognition. To tell the truth, they have brains and they communicate.
Yeah, they have brains and they communicate. So again, this is the answer I just told her now. So in the second example I gave, I specifically said that they use the brains, and they have the brains of the leaders, and this is important, and they use it. In the first example, we see external representations. They may use the brains to make them. You don't have to do it. You can do it with very simple physical objects. But we see that the external representations at least are brainless. They're representations in the lawn. So I call them brainless representations. And in the last example, okay, yes.
You began your lecture saying it's a brainless cognition.
Yes.
And then you said they actually have brains, they don't have a central brain.
Right.
It's to us as well. So we are also doing brain, according to what you said at the beginning.
Yes, but yeah.
Brainless cognition.
Yeah, so first when we connect, if you want to go to the human example, when we connect to many people solving the puzzle together, like the ants, and we gave the people the same communication that the ants had, we actually got worse, okay? And then they got better. But we can, okay, like on the first slide, I already said the ants do have brains, and we're going to look at the jump between the brain of a single ant and the group, and this is what I'm looking at. It's not that I acknowledge completely that ants have brains. They're very smart, actually.
I think I get what you mean. You're saying that there isn't a brain that is coordinating the behavior of the individual agents.
Yeah, no collective brain. There's no strong hierarchy.
And I think to clarify on the representation, isn't it the case that what the work is beautifully showing is that you can get complex adaptive behavior without needing to resort to this construct of a representation. And in your first example, you talked about externalizing representation, but actually there is no representation, is there? There was no internal representation. It becomes external.
Yeah.
And there isn't an external representation. What there is cues and affordances. And so that provides a challenge for accounts that resort to a notion of representation. I think that's a really, really interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, the definition of representation is important here if you put things on one side or the other, but I completely agree that it appears you can do a lot without. Yes, sorry. I don't know if I'm running out of time. Yes?
Is there a specific reason why you print those geometric shapes on the artificial leaves?
Why I put these specific geometric shapes?
Yes, like those markers on your leaves.
Ah, these shapes?
Yeah.
Yeah, just for because when you capture the scenario from 52 cameras, then you have to pull together all the information from the 52 cameras to make a single 3D image. So this helps the cameras to know which point on one camera is which point on the other. Yes.
It seems like they do stochastic gradient descent locally, but then every once in a while they have some global
right.
jump.
Yeah, right.
Do you see an ant sort of guiding this global jump?
Yeah. So first, it looks like it. I agree with you. That's what, but I don't know it yet. That's my intuition now, and my intuition continues also to tell me no. There's no ant that did this. No ant knows that this is what has to be done. But perhaps, yeah, the force. It could be that the force on one ant became so much that she cannot hold it anymore, and then it pops open. So there could be a failure to an ant, but I don't think it's one ant that understood. Okay, because she's holding there. She cannot go around and understand, I'm exactly the problem.
But when you had one hole in one leaf, there was no pressure on any ant, but they decided to discard that leaf.
Yeah. So this also happens mechanically, because ants can connect to the inner parts of the hole.
Uh-huh. And they didn't.
And then they can try to connect that to all kinds of places, and for some reason it led to the leaf being ejected. Yes?
I was curious, like, to what extent what you describe is also analogous to basal cognition in cells during morphogenesis, and like to what extent like cells self-organize, form complex shape.
Yes. Yeah. So I think the last part I showed it's very reminiscent of development. I think the difference is like development. You have a lot more control on what you work with. So I know you're in a protected womb, or you're in a chrysalis, which is you know exactly the boundary conditions, everything. And here, what is amazing that the ants can take any kind of leaves, any starting condition, whatever they have, they make it into. So it looks like it may be a harder problem, in this sense at least, than development.
Over here.
Let's take Lenore and then.
Yeah, so earlier you used differential geometry to show that those were sort of natural configurations. Is it possible, even in the last cases, that what they're getting is the optimal structure to have?
Yeah.
So there's a mathematical underpinning that they all have the same, there's a general algorithm that they're using. It's not emergence, it's really built in as mathematics. that it has to go to this.
Yeah,
to the,
I'm sure it plays a huge role. Sorry, I don't know the solution yet. So what I told you is kind of what I know more or less, and I'm looking exactly in what Michal said and what you said. These are exactly my intuitions to try to understand. Okay, how is it that they do it, and is it okay to call it cognition, or maybe it's still random search so these are interesting questions to look in and
I have to go to the.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ofer, for the super fascinating talk. And now to something completely different. We have Omer Tammuz from Caltech.